Mike McConville here, one more time, Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Let me start this conversation with why the customer brought the bass in to begin with. So this was the original nut. It had snapped off. Fairly common problem, not really a big deal. Well, the last place he brought it to obviously was not really set up to do this type of work. They decided to put a narrower nut on, and that was further complicated because they super glued it into place. Anyway, I got that out. I took a piece of Corian and fabricated a replacement nut. So I think what was really missed is this is a 50s reissue precision bass, and the necks were quite a bit wider. That part is taken care of, but there's a few other sort of design and manufacturing issues that I had to deal with as well. Let's go to the bridge. In many occasions in the past, I have had the opportunity to work the real deal 50s Fender basses. There's a few engineering issues with this bridge on this bass. So let me start with this. The actual coarseness of the threads on these saddles is much more coarse than the actual 50s threads. So what happens is the string itself does not sort of sit in a pocket. It sits on the tips of the threads. And this is reflected in your tuner. When you see the needle on your tuner kind of wavering and it doesn't seem to want to find its center, this is part of the reason why. So what I've done here is I have actually filed out under each string all the way across a flat spot. And that now is reflected on the tuner where the needle goes straight up without any wavering. What we've done by getting full contact on the bottom diameter of each string is we've increased the intensity of the fundamental note and gotten rid of those extraneous sort of overtones that you get when the string is sitting on a bunch of thin threads. So now each string is actually in a pocket. Although Fender did go to great lengths to duplicate that style of the 50s basses, the finish, the reverse gear tuners, the wider spacing at the nut, that's all pretty authentic. But what they didn't really take into account was the string spacing at the bridge. So the second reason I filed out those saddles, it allowed me to spread those strings so that they were equidistant from the outside of the fingerboard on both sides. The other thing is the strings line up beautifully with the pickup for these two strings, but this pickup is off center a little bit. The string spacing, hole to hole, was too narrow for this wider style neck. And that's not a big deal. I did file those out, like I said earlier, to kind of get a better fundamental note, but also to spread the strings out slightly so that they line up nicely with the outside of the fingerboard. But when you look at the pole pieces, you can see that this pickup lines up beautifully. That low E comes almost dead center between those posts. The A is just slightly off center, but when you look at this pickup, it's not quite right. So that was kind of part of what was missed in the engineering of this. That pickup should have been moved over this way a little tiny bit. Now things become further complicated because this is actually an aluminum like it was in the 50s. That we have to kind of live with, although it definitely doesn't affect the response of the top two strings compared to the bottom two strings. Still pretty even response, so not a big deal. I did get a tracer off of the frets to make up my self-adjusting radius gauge. We have that foam underneath and that just compresses. So I start by adjusting the two outside strings. I lift the two middle strings up out of the way, so I determine the action on the two outside strings. Once that's determined, then I just drop those two middle strings down until they just kiss that radius gauge. And now we have that perfect match at the bridge to the fingerboard radius. The final issue to be taken care of at this neck to body junction, which you've heard me say hundreds of times, this bass side needs to be skimmed, and it's really the first couple of frets that are the issue. The treble side, it needs even less. But of course, because it's a maple fingerboard, it means the entire thing's got to be masked off before I go anywhere near it with a file or sanding blocks.
No super glue, just regular wood glue. You don't want to make it more difficult for the next guy years down the road. You want him to be able to get this out without damaging anything. So luckily I did manage to get that other nut out without damaging anything. A little bit of wax into those slots. Oh, the other thing was, this string was cut way too short. The A string is the one string on this style of bass where you need to leave a little extra because it's so far back from the focal point at the slot that it will rattle. So this just barely makes it, but something to keep in mind. The A string is the one to watch for on a Fender bass. Give yourself lots of extra wine to bring that down tight to the face of the headstock. Okay, here's the last tip as we wrap up. I've got the strings in place, but I have not tensioned them yet. You can hear that jiggling. This neck is going in a back bow. We are relying on the string tension to pull it up straight. So all the way across, this is going in a bit of a back bow. And you'll see as we tune it up, we're going to check this again. Okay, let's take our straight edge now. No more rocking. So what we've done is we've balanced between the load of the truss rod and the torque of the strings. We've balanced this neck so that it's beautifully, almost dead straight, a little tiny bit of relief. This bass plays as smooth as butter now. This thing's ready now. Okay, two last things that I want to point out. This socket in the body that receives the neck, it should have been CNC'd about 25 to 30 thou deeper than it was. And this is reflected in the bridge set screws. Let me bring you in for a look at that. So you can see that we've almost run out of thread here with those screws. It's not a deal breaker, but it's too close for comfort. So I'm going to put some medium strength Loctite
on the threads to just make sure they don't jiggle loose. We'll go all the way across with that Loctite, and that'll take care of it. Again, just a little drop. So Loctite is essentially liquid nylon, and it goes on the threads, and it's pretty crucial, especially for bass, because they do tend to loosen up over time, and the string action will drop. The nice thing is it's still adjustable, it's just a lot tighter, and it won't move with the vibration of the strings. So I'm going to go all the way across, all 8 set screws. A little dab on there. We'll just wick up the excess Loctite while it's still wet. And do one final check with our self-adjusting radius gauge, and we are done with this bass. Better than the day it was made, that's for sure. Those middle ones up out of the way for a second, and then adjust those 2 outside strings to where they need to be. Looking good. Feel that Loctite already gelling. So now we don't have to worry about this thing moving around with the vibration of the strings. So that liquid nylon will take care of that.